Alright, so I'm covering the critical path, which is more to do with perceived performance, just how to make your websites feel quicker. So to give you some context of what I'm about to talk about, you can go through and minify and compress things all you like. In some cases, your website's just going to be large and there's not much you can do to improve that anymore. So
you just shot down Dan's talk in 3 seconds.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
Don't worry about Dan.
No. This is what you need to know.
I'm a snake oil salesman.
Okay. So these are some things that you probably notice if the site's slow. There's a white page that you see initially, and generally they'll sit there for a while when people's waiting for content. Or sometimes the text might come up unstyled, and if you're not ready for that, it could break your layout and just really rubbish for the user. If you're not doing JavaScript properly and you know that things are going to change when the JavaScript loads, pictures might jump around. If you've got, for example, a carousel and you're using a library that needs a DOM to be in a list and you've got all these images, when JavaScript kicks in, it might start hiding images, and so when that's slow, things will just jump around and look really weird for the user. If you've got like a news site or something, or a gallery with lots of images, that could be really slow for the user too. So just a few things, but I'll go through how to deal with some of those things. So going beyond actual performance. So the way to improve perceived performance is to think about the critical path. What this is just getting things to the browser as quick as possible so that people can see what is important straight away. Rather than loading things that might be required somewhere lower on the page, you're just loading things that they'll see first and just optimizing for that, make things seem quicker. So some of the ways you optimize this is by this thing called above the fold, which generally just means what people will see as soon as the site loads. This really depends on your device or your monitor. So if you want to optimize for above the fold, you have to know what you're trying to target and the devices that your website are going to be viewed on. So best way is to go through the different devices, kind of understand what should be loaded and check all the devices, and then kind of make a bit of a plan about what content you think you need to load first, and basically just prioritize things so that it can load faster. So the first bit is just how to deal with large CSS files really. So it's always best to try to load less CSS. There's really no point in improving perceived performance unless everything's kind of optimal. So the first thing is if you've got a very large CSS file, then generally you're using some sort of framework, maybe like a grid system or Twitter's Bootstrap or anything like that. They're generally quite large and have a lot of things in there. So my recommendation is if you use less or SAS, you just pull in what you need, and try not to load everything if you don't need it. And then the next step, usually this is what I normally do, is to kind of group my CSS files into things that are critical and non-critical. So things that might not be required on the initial page. So if I'm doing a carousel and that CSS is used on the home page, then I'll group that in some file that'll be loaded for the home page. But if I'm using, say, a contact form later on in my website in the contacts page and not in my home page, maybe I'll group that into a separate file. But things like that, you don't really need to do unless it's really slow and you're actually trying to improve things in a large scale. And so that the next bit is inlining your CSS so that you don't block the rendering. So these are some tips for inlining your CSS in the header. So just as soon as your HTML is loaded, all the styles kick in and you're not actually waiting, you don't have that white flash of every page there. So this is generally what I do. I usually set a background color. So as soon as your site loads, you get this background color straight away. There's no white page. So in the head, in my style tags, I'll have, this is one of the first things I'll have is the background color. And then after that, looking at above the fold, what you have in there. So if you've got a carousel and it's got a certain height, you know exactly what that height is. Don't wait for the image to come in to fill the height. Just set the height in your head. But there are other things like maybe you've got a sidebar or whatever else. Just set all those sides first. As soon as your HTML loads, those things will take up the space, and then when content actually comes in, it'll just fill in, and you won't have things jumping around. So these are sort of simple sort of things, but it makes a big difference for the user. It looks like your site's loading progressively rather than just kind of, you're just waiting for things to come in and jump around. JavaScript is another thing that you can kind of load in such a way that it gives them a better experience, and user a better experience. So generally I try to do the same thing in my CSS as my JavaScript, trying to think about what's needed on that front page or on the actual page that the person's on. So I'll things up the libraries. If I don't need jQuery on the very first page, or I don't need it on whatever page, I might not load it at all. And I'll kind of break things into separate files. If I don't need a carousel on one of the sub pages and only the home page, maybe I'll break that code into a separate area and things like that. So it's a bit of a strategy of how you want to load your JavaScript. And then I use something like Head.js, which is a script loader, and generally that will just kind of load the things in order of how you need it, and just the scripts you need. Just makes it a bit easier rather than, because you could just have everything at the bottom of the page, but that kind of makes it unpredictable, and things might load like at different times and certain pages might break. So it uses something like Head.js, it waits for whatever library to finish, and then it'll just load the code in the correct order and things won't break. Also, I recommend just loading the JavaScript you need for the device. So if you say don't need animation for your mobile or whatever, and certain things are turned off, then you don't need that JavaScript, don't load it at all. So you can actually check for the viewport width in your JavaScript, and then decide from there using maybe Head.js. If you need that code, just load it in. And the same thing with CSS, you can actually inline the critical JavaScript as well. And things I do for that would be like, so like the Head.js, where I've got the orders of the scripts that I'm loading, I might inline that into my actual page. Because since that's unique to the actual page itself, it doesn't really need to be in a file, and generally it's quite small. So if I'm trying to optimize how the JavaScript loads for each page, I'll do this. I'll go through each one, and at the bottom of the page there'll be the libraries I need and the scripts I actually need to make that page work, and that just makes things efficient, and you load what you actually need. Apart from the CSS and JavaScript, there are other things you can do too. So this can be common for some sites, some large sites, but web fonts. One of the issues I've seen in the past is that when you don't pick a decent font stack and you get a flash of unstyled text and stuff in your site, generally your layout can break. So say if you're just copying and pasting from Google Fonts, you might have whatever your font type is, and then they might have a fallback of just sans serif. If the widths vary quite a lot between those two, and you're designing it so it fits for your particular font, when the actual font kicks in, it might change from how it looks initially. So the best thing to do here is just pick a font stack with a bunch of things that are similar sizes. So if it goes to a fallback and it loads the actual font, things don't move around too much. Simple things like that makes a pretty good experience for the user. Generally, I would probably inline some of this with the pretty cool CSS. You don't have to, but I like to just have it there. As soon as the HTML is ready, then things just don't move around too much. But this is kind of like nth level sort of optimization that you can do if you think it's really required. If you're not using a lot of fonts, then they'll probably load in quick enough that you won't notice these sort of things. So yeah, so you use those required really. And if you're using a lot of fonts, it's probably best to load them later with JavaScript. So Typekit has a library that they created with Google that you load in all your weights and stuff by JavaScript instead of putting it ahead and kind of blocking the rendering. That's definitely recommended. And if you're using things like icon fonts, like Awesome or whatever for your site, I would definitely recommend putting that in later, because that's usually causing quite a lot of things. That or probably optimize it by just commenting out the fonts that you don't actually need, just optimizing it that way. And lastly, images. This is probably mostly what Dan's talked about lazy loading and knowing how many pictures you're loading in your page, just kind of limiting the amount of requests so that all the other more important CSS and JavaScript things get pulled in first. And just reducing that payload from the start. And